Newsnight now on BBC Two with Jeremy Paxman.
The Prime Minister promises the justice system a makeover. Can he do that and keep it just? Good evening. To get a system of justice fit for the 21st century, the Prime Minister says ancient legal safeguards will have to be jettisoned. The right not to be prosecuted twice for the same crime could be scrapped. How does the Minister in charge justify changes in the law that appear to favour state over individual? The Prime Minister's wife embarrasses the government with comments about suicide bombers. The New York lawyer facing trial herself because she represented a Muslim fundamentalist. And how a Victorian mansion was saved from the 21st century. The British criminal justice system is biased in favour of the criminal. I exaggerate, but only slightly, the burden of the Prime Minister's plans to reform. To bring things into the 21st century, he proposed in a speech today to abolish the right which has existed in this country for centuries that people may not be tried twice for the same crime. The state, he thinks, should also have the right to challenge judges who halt trials on technical grounds. Is this the beginning of a shift in the relationship between the state and the individual, a shift only delayed today by the news that the Home Secretary is putting on hold plans to allow a huge range of bureaucrats to have access to emails and mobile phone records? Our political editor, Martha Carney, reports.
Never can there come fog too thick, never can there come mud and mire too deep, to assort with the groping and floundering condition which this High Court of Chancery, most pestilent of hoary sinners, holds this day in the sight of heaven and earth. It wasn't quite the excoriating rhetoric of Bleak House, but today's criticism of the legal system placed it firmly in the Dickensian era.
The English legal system has been an influential model for criminal justice worldwide, and it has powerful strengths. And we have already achieved a lot in making it work better, for example, by reducing some of the delays. But I do believe that the time has come to drag our criminal justice system from the 19th century into the 21st century.
But some modern lawyers weren't impressed.
Well, that's a very good headline-grabbing remark, isn't it? But I don't believe it to be true. The fact is that if you look at any aspect of our system, you will find that as a result of recent reforms, either by judges or by Parliament or both, it is a modern system which works to cater for the needs of the 21st century.
The government wants to change the law because of concerns over crime, in particular over young offenders. Rather than silk pocket handkerchiefs, it's mobile phone thefts which have caused a rise in street crime figures nowadays. The Grange estate in Stoke is one of 5 police priority areas around the country because of its high crime rate. It's expected that next month, nationally, there'll be a large increase in the annual crime rate, all of which is leading to people losing faith in the criminal justice system.
At the end of the day, the judicial system lets places like Cobridge down and other communities similar. When sentences are 5 years, 10 years, and the culprits only serve half that period and then re-offend, it seems pointless. I think the judicial system, apart from anything else, is letting everyone down.
Even veteran campaigners against miscarriages of justice believe there's a need for change.
There's no doubt that the criminal justice system has been failing a lot of people, especially in kind of areas where I represent, poor inner city areas, where a lot of youths are running out of control. We're not talking about organised crime, we're talking about disorganised crime. And frankly, we've got to do a lot more to get to grips with it.
In the wake of those concerns, the government's keen to show no mercy to persistent criminals.
The time has come to rebalance the system so that we restore the faith of victims and witnesses that the court hearing and indeed the criminal justice system will be fair to all the people affected by it, so that we restore their confidence that a criminal will indeed be brought to justice.
The main proposals to be fleshed out in a white paper are to change the rules of evidence, giving more weight to victims and prosecution witnesses, to abolish double jeopardy so you can be tried twice for the same offence, and tougher sentencing with an end to automatic early release. But the controversial plan to end some jury trials has been abandoned.
It's very difficult to see how we will construct sufficient safeguards to prevent it being the case that if someone has been acquitted once and then new evidence has come to light and they're brought to retrial, there is a presumption of guilt. Now, our whole system is founded on the presumption of innocence. It may be that someone can design sufficient safeguards to prevent a presumption of guilt occurring, and I'm more than willing to discuss that with the Home Secretary, but I want to be very confident that we don't build in a presumption of guilt to our system.
There's certainly been no shortage of initiatives on crime. 38 in the first 40 weeks of this government, 11 criminal justice acts. But amidst this blizzard of initiatives, there are some in Whitehall, in the Treasury in particular, who are concerned there's no clear overall strategy. In fact, an impression has been given of a department being buffeted by a tabloid agenda, which certainly wasn't helped by the Home Secretary's spectacular U-turn today. Government plans to give a wide range of public bodies, like the Food Standards Agency, the power to pry into private emails and mobile phone calls, were today shelved indefinitely after protests.
Well, the proposals put were intended to provide protection and regulation of the access to data. The rest of the world interpreted them in entirely the opposite direction, and I think when you're in a hole you should stop digging. So actually getting off this, having a full consultation, addressing the issues that people have raised, seems to be just good common sense.
We fought off some while ago proposals under the Terrorism Act, which went too far towards snoopers' charters. And now we've had this, and we've luckily fought this one off too. I think what we see is constant efforts by this government to persuade us that we don't need to be vigilant about the liberties of the individual. We do need to be vigilant about the liberties of the individual. It matters to catch crooks.
So now crime, traditionally an area of strength for the Conservatives, has become centre of the political agenda, a risky area for Labour when voters come to make their choice in the next election.
And the Minister responsible, Lord Faulkner, is with us now in the studio. The presumption behind many of the things in the Prime Minister's speech was that the legal system was failing.
Yeah, I think it is, in the sense that too many people think that people they believe to have committed crimes don't appear to be dealt with effectively by the criminal justice system, and that's particularly apparent in deprived areas.
But the matter of belief is neither here nor there. What matters is proof.
Yes, I quite agree with that. You can only be convicted of a crime if you're convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. But what happens where, for example, there is compelling evidence that somebody has been guilty of a crime? Should the court try that even though he might have been acquitted once before?
So all the ancient principles that underlay the idea of freedom from double jeopardy are to be set aside now after how many years? 800 years?
I think one's got to look at what gives people confidence in the criminal justice system. Just let me finish, Jeremy. Suppose the position were that somebody, after being acquitted of, say, murder, had then confessed to the murder. What brings the judicial system into disrepute? The fact that he gets clean away with it, or the fact that people like yourself can say the double jeopardy system has lasted for 800 years?
But that has always been the case.
Yes, and is that a reason for continuing with it?
It's
no, I think...
in the, what,
yeah.
Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution?
I don't know if it's enshrined in the Fifth Amendment, but you're relying entirely on 800 years. What happens if the position is that everybody sees somebody who, as I say, for example, confesses to a murder, which has happened in the past, but through the technicality that you refer to, gets away with it?
It's not a technicality, it has been a basic principle of common law in this country. And what I might equally well say, you say what's happened in 800 years to make it worthwhile continuing indefinitely. I might equally well say to you what's happened in the last 5 years to make it worth getting rid of like that.
Well, because people need to have confidence that the judicial system, the criminal justice system, is able to deal with those who are actually guilty of crimes. Of course, it must be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. But what do people feel when, take the example I've given, the person who confesses to the crime gets away with it? Now, you're relying upon, you say 800 years of history. I don't know how long, whether it's 800 years or not, but people see somebody getting away with a crime they actually admit they committed.
But you know fine well what the reasons for the double jeopardy defence are. The danger of an unfair conviction at second instance, the dangers of a lackadaisical police investigation in the first place, numerous arguments. All of those are simply to be set aside because you perceive there to be some crisis of confidence in which some people may be getting away with it.
I think it's very, very important that people feel confident. For the last 12 months, I was Minister of Housing and Regeneration and going around deprived communities. And irrespective of how bad the housing might have been, the #1 concern always was crime and antisocial behaviour. People saying that their lives were being ruined by that and saying either offenders who'd got in the hands of the criminal justice system were offending on bail, or if they were convicted, nothing appeared to be done about them. We need to recognise that that is a problem which undermines confidence in the system.
In that case, why don't you address another profound concern that many people have, which is that a jury is not allowed to know what a person's record of previous convictions might be?
I think that's quite an important issue, and I think one should, in the course of looking at how the judicial system works, trust the fact finders, whether it be the jury, the judge or the magistrates, to analyse the evidence before them. They should be able to judge on the basis of all the material available whether somebody is guilty or not.
But why shouldn't a jury be entitled to know what offences a person has previously committed, if they may be relevant?
I think if they are relevant, for example, to the credibility of the defendant, or if it indicates that the defendant has done similar things in the past, that might well be something that...
It could be in the white paper?
Well, we'll have to consider it for the purposes of the white paper, but that is something that we need to consider quite carefully, I think.
When we look at these proposed changes to the law, and you look at what your own Home Office was proposing only last week, and we were told was a perfectly sensible, watertight and thoroughly rational exercise, the so-called Snoopers Charter, which today the Home Secretary has admitted was a bit of a blunder. What are we to make of your attempts to redefine the relationship between the individual and the state?
In relation to the issues under the RIPA, which is the Regulatory Investigatory Powers Act, what the Home Secretary has said, because there has been considerable opposition to it, it's something that needs to be debated further, and I think that's an extremely sensible way of dealing with things. In relation to the criminal justice system, it's very important that one doesn't rush into anything, and that's why Lord Justice Old was appointed last year to look at reform of the court system. Mr. John Halliday was appointed to look at sentencing, because it's not something, for all the reasons you indicated, you referred to 800 years of history, it's not right that one should rush into any change, and that's why
well, you prefer to write off 800 years of history in the case of this particular legal reform, but how long have emails been around?
I don't know how long emails have been around, but in terms of issues like double jeopardy, it's something where if there is a coherent case for changing the rule, then I think it's right to change it. And again, I'm not quite sure what the answer to the proposition where somebody, for example, admits that he's committed a murder where he's been acquitted in the past, why should he be able to flat the criminal justice system?
Lord Faulkner, thank you. Well, you can't imagine Mrs. Attlee doing it. In fact, I can't even remember her first name. You can't imagine Mary Wilson doing it. You can't imagine Audrey Callaghan either. But Cherie Blair decided long ago she wasn't going to be a conventional Prime Minister's spouse. Today, at the very moment the Blair administration was trying to lift itself out of accusations about clothing itself in purple, she made a remark about Palestinian suicide bombers, which dropped Number 10 straight back into unwanted controversy. There could not have been a worse moment to try publicly to understand suicide bombers. In a Jerusalem suburb this morning, 19 people, many of them children, were murdered. It was the 69th Palestinian suicide bombing in 21 months. Responsibility claimed by the extremist group Hamas. As the Israeli Prime Minister visited the scene, he swore the fight against terrorism would go on. Hours later in London, Queen Rania of Jordan was launching a charity appeal for medical aid for Palestinians. Appearing at her side was Cherie Blair. When reporters asked the Queen and the Prime Minister's wife for their response to the Jerusalem blast.
When you have anger and frustration, the longer that stays unchecked, and you never know what's going to happen, what kind of dangers our world will be exposed to. So if anything, it highlights the importance to pursue the political track as soon as possible.
Mrs. Blair?
I would agree with that, as long as young people feel they've got no hope but to blow themselves up. We're never going to make progress, are we?
One sentence, but it drew an appalled response. The Israeli embassy in London condemned the comment, and Conservatives said her words would cause massive offence to the bereaved families. Mrs. Blair issued an immediate apology, saying no offence was intended and that she condemned the atrocity in the strongest possible terms. But the Prime Minister had to use his joint news conference with the Spanish Prime Minister to defend his wife.
I hope that no one misdescribes her sentiments or mine or anyone else's. Everybody in this situation feels nothing but the deepest sympathy for the people that have lost their lives in the latest terrorist attack.
Mrs. Blair has made much of still being just Cherie Booth QC, a working woman who merely happens to live at the most famous domestic address in Britain. It isn't that easy a role. Well, Martha Carney's with us in the studio now. So how's this playing?
Well, I've got the front page of just one paper so far, which is the Daily Mail. I think you can see it there, Cherie Bomb Gaff Fury. And I imagine we'll be getting other sort of coverage a bit like... Oh,
I'll just carry on holding it up till we finally get a camera. There we are. Yeah.
And, you know, it is hard to imagine an area more sensitive in which to blunder into, particularly on a day like this. And it's raised great controversy during the day. And we've got a Labour MP, Louise Ellman, who's criticised her for glamorising suicide bombers. Although interesting, a wife of a Conservative MP, in fact, a shadow cabinet member, Diane Yeo, Tim Yeo's wife, has been supporting her, saying that Cherie does not condone the taking of innocent lives.
I can't think of another occasion on which she has said anything like this, and clearly it was unintended, and she apologised for it afterwards. So why is everyone making such a fuss about it?
I think they're making such a fuss because it is such a sensitive area, but also because she has become, perhaps not of her own, definitely not of her own volition, but she has become a controversial figure. I mean, in the past, she's come under attack for venturing into what some people would see as the political arena. She was seen, somebody called her as a cross between Hillary Clinton and Lady Macbeth after she wrote on the Human Rights Act. Some would say perfectly justifiable area for her to be talking about. She is, after all, an eminent barrister in her own right. Then earlier this year, it emerged that she'd been hosting a series of seminars in Downing Street, and she was called Zarina Cherie. Now, somebody who was sort of unaccountable, entering the politics, but she's seen, she herself would say all she was doing was chairing these meetings, acting as a kind of moderator, and showing that Downing Street cared about certain areas when the Prime Minister himself wasn't able to be there. But I think what we'll see with, you know, stuff like the Daily Mail, it can undoubtedly just add to the siege mentality in Downing Street. You know, Peter Mandelson has gone, Stephen Barr's Blairite cabinet minister has left, and there were calls last week for Alistair Campbell to go, and now Cherie herself is under attack.
No one's asking for her to go, are they?
Well, not.
Heck of a story if they did. Now, we're joined now by Anne Leslie of the Daily Mail and by Linda McDougall, who wrote an unauthorised biography. It was unauthorised, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
I imagine it would be by the tone. But, Anne Leslie, is this a big issue?
I think it is, because the Middle East is a big issue. And after all, Cherie Blair is a barrister, very highly paid barrister, very clever barrister. Barristers know the power of words. They know how to use words so as to not give opportunities to their opponents. In the Middle East, words are in themselves almost bombs. I work in the Middle East a lot, and I'm there recently. And already the Arabic press, the Arabic media are being very excited about this. They are promoting this statement as being something that shows something about the way the government is. The fact is that she has made a statement of incredibly crass insensitivity, which if she were clever and if her advisors were clever, would not have allowed her to make.
The other accusation, I suppose, behind this is that she is trying to have her cake and eat it. This is a woman who came into Downing Street and said, I am going to pursue my career as a lawyer. I am not going to be a bit of arm candy for the Prime Minister. And yet, because she's the Prime Minister's wife, is invited to a function with the Queen of Jordan, at which she chooses to make this sort of comment.
It's a sad day for women who want to have careers and lives of their own. When the Blairs arrived in Downing Street, I thought, this huge step forward. What's going to happen now is this woman is going to be able to live here and pursue her own career and have her own views. I was disappointed almost immediately because what she decided to do was to say nothing. For month after month, almost year after year, she went out in the public with her husband and stood there and said nothing. I tried in my book to encourage her, be more normal, get on with it, say that all she did today was say what I would say, what Martha would say, what Anne, who is an expert, might not have said. It was a harmless
I might
remark.
even have said that, but the fact
it was
is
a harmless remark and it's been tacked on to.
Yes.
Look, you can't, it doesn't matter that she's the Prime Minister's wife.
Does,
the whole point should be, it was not an offensive remark. You can't, because you're married to somebody, then have to live by that law. You can't say because she's the Prime Minister's wife. She can't say what a sad
For example,
thing.
if Hillary Clinton...
This is not Hillary Clinton.
No.
Hillary Clinton's a politician.
No, I'm just... Well, she is now, but
no,
she wasn't then.
Hillary Clinton's always been a politician.
Cherie, as you know...
Cherie Blair was a politician.
A politician.
No, I don't think so.
A would-be politician.
Yeah, she decided
to... A very amateur first go at a seat she would never have won.
If, say, the First Lady, say Hillary Clinton, had said at the time that the IRA were blowing up our innocent civilians, well, you can understand it because...
But that's an outrage. Cherie Blair said nothing like that.
What she said, if she'd been like Queen Rania of Jordan, who, after all, is an official First Lady, because we don't have that in our Constitution, and she is the First Lady of a nation which is 60% Palestinian and 100% anti-Israel. What she said at the same event was she talked about the suffering on both sides. Cherie, who, after all, is a barrister, should know that if she didn't say both sides, she was going to get into trouble.
I'm sorry, this is naivety. This argument is not about Palestine and it's not about Israel. It's about spin in Downing Street, and it's about the fact that people like Michael Ancram call this an outrage, and we all, as the press, seize on it with delight and say how wonderful.
No,
Cherie
you don't work as often as I do in the Middle East. You would know that the Israeli press is furious. The Arabic press, listen, you know, this is a global world, and the thing is that her husband and Jack Straw they're trying to...
She's not.
No, well, exactly. They are trying to act as honest brokers in this awful business in the Middle East. The Prime Minister's wife, who, as we know, has transformed the role to a certain extent by being much more political than the previous ones. You talked about Mrs. Attlee, nobody can even remember her name. She has chosen to walk into an absolute minefield and say something which is a Freudian slip, I'm sure, which showed her feelings. This is going to be interpreted by both the Israelis and the Palestinians.
She said nothing
as an expression. No, she did. She did by omission. Queen Rania mentioned suffering on both sides. This is on a day...
Surely you wouldn't be saying that Cherie Booth wasn't sympathetic to both sides. Everyone would know.
No, but
this is a manufactured row.
No, it isn't.
To add to the spin row.
However manufactured it may be by people like the Daily Mail, the fact is that she did a very stupid thing, and I'm sure her husband is none too thrilled.
OK, I think we'll unmanufacture it now. Thank you both very much for joining us. Now, for once, the advertising may not oversell the product. The Panorama programme tomorrow will reveal the way that police and army inside the United Kingdom have collaborated in murder. The programme has had leaked to it some of the findings of an investigation into alleged collaboration with loyalist killers in Northern Ireland. The conclusion is that such cooperation did exist, and paramilitary figures claim it resulted in murder. Mark Urban gives his assessment now of what's been going on and why.
Tomorrow's Panorama is about the past, loyalist terrorist operations in the 80s, and also about the future.
It's just a normal Sunday. Everyone got ready for Mass.
The programme is, in effect, a preview of a report by Sir John Stevens following his 12-year inquiry into collusion between loyalists, army and police. Sir John and his officers are now pressing for radical change in the way Northern Ireland is policed. This panorama will cause a stir because it strongly suggests that the security forces were using loyalist terrorists to target particular Catholics. It also begs the question as to whether some of the army and police officers involved in handling agents who were in those loyalist organisations should now be prosecuted for their roles in the deaths of up to 16 people. Papers from the Stevens inquiry that were shared with the BBC programme suggest the army had an improper relationship with Brian Nelson, a former soldier who infiltrated the Ulster Defence Association. He became their principal intelligence officer, targeting Catholics for assassination.
Was what was done in the name of the state defensible?
I think if you look at the work that we did, and this has been the most extensive criminal inquiry in history, the work we did in discovering what the activities of the double agent, so-called double agent Nelson, was involved in, of course that was inexcusable.
The Stevens team believed the army, who ran Nelson as an agent, reorganised his records of Republican terrorists so as to ensure legitimate terrorist targets would be hit.
That was the conclusion that we came to. There was certainly an agreement between his handlers and Nelson that the targeting should concentrate on what they described as the right people.
Panorama says that intelligence documents leaked to Nelson by the Army and RUC identified 52 people who were later attacked by loyalist terrorists, 16 of them killed. Nelson ran out of control in the end, being arrested by the Stevens team in 1990 and sentenced 2 years later to a long jail term. But what about his handlers, including the senior army officer who gave evidence on Nelson's behalf at that trial? And here we come to the rub. Sir John Stevens and his people are now leaking elements of their report because their inquiry is about to enter its most difficult phase, that in which they interview senior army and police officers under caution, possibly with a view to charging them with serious offences. Stevens, it seems, expects a backlash from the Northern Ireland security establishment and is getting his retaliation in first in order to cut the ground from under them. There's another reason why that's happening now, because Hugh Ord, the principal investigator with the Stevens team, has recently been named as the new head of the Northern Ireland Police Service. He's expected to reform the special branch there, and they're implicated by Stevens with targeting the Catholic solicitor Pat Finucane for assassination, an allegation backed up by Ken Barrett, a loyalist secretly filmed by Panorama.
To be honest, Finucane would have been alive the day if the Peelers had. Say it again? Finucane would have been alive the day if the Peelers hadn't interfered.
How far a witness like Ken Barrett could ever be used to mount a prosecution of one of those peelers or police is another issue, of course. And since the RUC detectives and soldiers implicated in this interim report have so far had little opportunity to defend their actions, it's not necessarily a safe bet that anyone will be prosecuted. What will happen, though, is that those in the army and police who would try and frustrate Hugh Ord in his mission to transform the security establishment will be put on the back foot from the outset.
And you can see the full Panorama programme tomorrow night at 9 on BBC One. The commonplace which emerged from the catastrophe which hit the United States on September the 11th last year was that nothing would be the same again. In the field of civil rights, of which that country has been so proud, it has turned out to be true. Suspects are imprisoned without trial, surveillance has been hugely increased, and now the once privileged relations between lawyers and clients are under fire. The first duty of a state is the security of its citizens, but Peter Marshall reports now from New York on a case which shows what that can mean in practice.
Lynn Stewart is a 62-year-old New York attorney. For the best part of the last decade, she's been the lawyer for Sheikh Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh, who's currently serving a life sentence for plotting to blow up New York City. But now America's chief law officer, the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, has come between them. He's charged Lynn Stewart with helping the sheikh direct terrorist operations from his prison cell. It's a disturbing tale from the heart of America's war on terrorism. Is your first loyalty to your country or to your client?
What is loyalty to the country? I believe I'm the patriot here. I don't think that Ashcroft is. I think that I have acts of patriotism by resisting him rather than being a patriot because I kowtow and do a goose step to his music.
I don't think it's a good thing for our society for lawyers to be accessories, to be accomplices to their clients, particularly when their clients are terrorists.
In 1993, 6 people were killed and 1,000 more injured when a terrorist bomb exploded at the World Trade Center. With hindsight, it's now understood this was the first Al-Qaeda attack on American soil. The blind sheikh, who preached from a mosque just across the river, was later convicted of the criminal conspiracy behind that and other unrealized bombings of New York bridges and tunnels. To Osama bin Laden and his followers, the sheikh is both mentor and hero. Prior to imprisonment, recognized as a spiritual leader of the international jihad. The sheikh's son appeared with bin Laden in a video demanding his father's freedom, urging followers, avenge your sheikh and go to the spilling of blood. So Sheikh Rahman has long been a potent figure and, for America, a dangerous man, even in a maximum security cell. Now he's at the center of a landmark prosecution with implications for civil liberties and counter-terrorism. But it's not the blind sheikh who's being put on trial. It's Lynn Stewart, his lawyer.
I'd like to introduce the Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft.
For the politician John Ashcroft, it was a major announcement, a much-needed success against terror.
Today's indictment charges 4 individuals, including Rahman's lawyer, a United States citizen, with aiding Sheikh Abdul Rahman in continuing to direct terrorist activities of the Islamic group from his prison cell in the United States.
The question raised by Lynn Stewart's case has been nagging away ever since September the 11th. Has America gone too far in amending its legal liberties to combat those who'd exploit those liberties for their own ends? The point is, just as Al-Qaeda's been using the young and disaffected for their operations, so it's claimed they've also been manipulating America's legal system and a lawyer, Lynn Stewart. Lynn Stewart's prosecution stems from the FBI's bugging of her conversations with the sheikh and his aides. The indictment states that in prison visits in May 2000, she conspired to knowingly provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization. It says she actively concealed the true nature of a conversation between the sheikh and her translator by making extraneous comments in English to mask the Arabic. A sealed affidavit from an FBI agent, leaked and seen by Newsnight, goes further. The agent says Lynn Stewart, the sheikh and the translator shared laughs about the fine acting job she was doing in successfully tricking the guards. It adds that Lynn Stewart joked, "I can get an award for it." It sounds damning. Lynn Stewart says there's an innocent explanation.
We had previously discussed what would be read to the sheikh, taken to the sheikh. It included newspapers, it included letters from home, it included many, many things. We would go over the things in advance, but we did realize that at times it would look peculiar, perhaps, that that the interpreter and the sheikh were having a conversation, that it wasn't a translated, "Sheikh, I have a letter, this is what it says, what do you think of that?" And then the translator would say it, the sheikh would respond, the translator would repeat what he said. So we worked out this method. But we also knew that it might look peculiar to the guards, and because you never want to do anything on a prison visit that makes them stop your visit, halt what's going on, have a reason to look through your materials, perhaps. So at that point, we would interrupt and I would talk to the sheikh in a normal conversation.
With New York forever changed by September the 11th, the FBI has been given far more freedom to monitor and bug lawyers and their clients. The grounds, national security.
We are in a critical period now in which this country is not only vulnerable, but our beautiful country has been attacked and is probably under siege at the moment. And under those circumstances, self-defense does require extraordinary measures. And by extraordinary measures, I don't mean scrapping the Bill of Rights. I mean extending somewhat, and to a small extent, as necessary, the prerogative of the government to operate aggressively against terrorists.
But how far can the government go?
Far enough, but not too far. How can one answer that question? It's something new for us. We are feeling our way step by step.
The Sheikh originally came to prominence in Egypt when he was accused and acquitted of plotting the assassination of President Sadat. His followers have waged a long and bloody campaign to turn Egypt into an Islamic state. The 1997 attack at Luxor, which left 58 tourists and 4 Egyptians dead, was done in the Sheikh's name. During that prison visit 2 years ago, the Sheikh told Lynn Stewart he was withdrawing support for a ceasefire in Egypt. She then told the press, thus violating a federal agreement not to publicise the Sheikh's views. Lynn Stewart admits this, but says at the time it was regarded as merely a technical offence. 2 years later, it's suddenly been revived as part of a major criminal charge. You spread the message he was no longer in favour of the ceasefire.
Yes.
Isn't that a dangerous message to spread?
Well, I'm not there to decide. I represent clients. Clients have a right to speak out, in my view,
Well,
particularly those who are on the world scene.
That's a fine legal distinction, but ethically, morally, people are getting killed because of statements like
Well,
that.
that sounds like Ashcroft talking. I don't believe that's true. I don't think if someone had said to me, let us take, here's a message, kill 40 Greek travelers on the road to Damascus.
Well, I mean,
that's a different message. We're talking here about a political situation in which one of the leaders of people are waiting to hear what he thinks about things, and you're telling me we shouldn't take it out? I don't see that.
Whatever the wisdom and ethics of Lynn Stewart's actions, a number of legal voices say her prosecution is political. They believe the timing's the key.
There's a huge gap between, several years gap between when she's alleged to have done this and the fact that they're now charging this, that Ashcroft marches into New York City in the year 2002, announces we're going after the lawyers in this case. And I think there's symbolism in it. I think he intends to say, lawyers, watch out. Be careful who you represent. Don't take on unpopular causes, and don't criticize this administration.
Lynn Stewart was born into a Calvinist Republican family, not so different from the conservative Christian upbringing of the Attorney General himself. But by the 1960s, she'd become radicalized, campaigning against the Vietnam War and poverty, and in favor of black liberation. For nearly 40 years, she's been an irritant to the establishment. Now, some believe, the establishment is seizing its moment to hit back. They say her prosecution is political. Certainly, since the blind Sheikh's arrest 9 years ago, the prosecuting authorities in the US have struggled. This man, Ahmed Sattar, is the Sheikh's spokesman. Back then, soon after the bombing, I interviewed Sattar. Even then, he appeared to be under surveillance. He said it was the FBI.
They followed me for about 4 or 5 weeks. Then I was given an offer by them to be an informant.
Who offered you that?
An FBI agent. And excuse my language, he says, you know, don't bullshit me. He just says it right, clear. And so he says, you know, do you think that I'm trying to recruit you? Yes, I am. Why not?
9 years on, Sattar's in custody, accused with Lynn Stewart of spreading the blind Sheikh's message. They're mounting a joint defence and have started by calling for the case to be dismissed. They say the FBI bugging violates their constitutional rights. It's a long shot, but it reflects the concerns raised by this case.
I think that they shouldn't have detained thousands of people as they did after 9/11, and I brought a lawsuit against this administration challenging that. Now, am I helping terrorism? Someone could make that argument. Someone could sit in a park in any city in this country or around the world and say, Goodman's really helping terrorists. Why don't we throw him behind bars? And by the way, since we're now locking up American citizens and not even allowing them to see a judge, let's dispense with due process completely. That's the danger of this. This is a slippery slope.
We have disrupted an unfolding terrorist plot to attack the United States by exploding a radioactive dirty bomb.
When John Ashcroft went live on American TV from Moscow to tell of the so-called dirty bomber, it added fuel to those who believe he's railroading justice through fear.
Radioactive material that is highly toxic to humans and can cause mass death and injury.
In Greenwich Village, traditional gathering place for New York's radicals, Lynn Stewart's become a cause célèbre. At a rally for her supporters, what they see as Ashcroft's excesses were a prime topic, with Lynn Stewart cast as brave resister. Speakers told of how, since September the 11th, defence lawyers have felt cowed by an overbearing Justice Department.
Respected colleagues, when they read my name, when they saw me on national television, they said, Sohail, you're crazy, you're nuts. Why are you sticking your neck out? Aren't you concerned? And I said, you know, I took the oath when I became an attorney to represent my client, to put my client's interest before my interest.
That, Lynn Stewart would say, is exactly her position. But it could mean she spends the rest of her life in prison.
I think the government is sophisticated enough, even this new Justice Department is sophisticated enough to know that when you bring a case like this, you have to be pretty sure that you have a good case, that the evidence is strong. And if you just, in the exercise of good judgment and prosecutorial discretion, you do not bring cases against lawyers unless you are quite sure you can win them.
I have a sense that there is a tide running. It's not running with me, but it has to be proven. And that's all I ask. Let's start on the even playing field. Let me have a chance to defend myself. Don't convict me before I walked in the courtroom.
Peter Marshall reporting. Kylie Minogue is going to have to find somewhere else to lay her head. She was one of several people with masses of money who were rumoured to be on the point of buying up the spectacular mansion of Tintersfield near Bristol. It's the finest remaining example in Britain of a Victorian Gothic mansion complete with original contents. 2 months ago, the National Trust launched a campaign to save it. Today, it announced it had bought the house for a large but undisclosed sum, thanks to one of the biggest ever grants of taxpayers' money. Our culture correspondent, Madeleine Holt, reports.
A jewel in a landscape setting, so enthused Country Life magazine in 1902. Another writer raved about it today.
Without any doubt, it's the finest surviving Victorian Gothic country house in Britain. It's very, very rich stone carving, wood carving, marble, tile floors, everything is absolute. I mean, it's the best that money could buy.
Tintersfield was a house for its time, built between the 1860s and 1880s by a family made rich by the agricultural revolution. Their fortune was made from guano, that's bird droppings, used as fertilizer. The Gibbs were just as industrious about their faith. They built the largest private chapel in England, as well as one for Keble College in Oxford. Tintersfield was just as remarkable for its mod cons. In 1866, the Builder magazine described how a water wheel supplies a tank sunk in the hill above the mansion. From this, pipes supply tanks in the roofs for baths, cooking, and hydrants on each floor as a provision against fire. 100 years ago, country life found here the perfect country life. But by the 1970s, Tintersfield had a reputation for reclusiveness. The last Lord Wraxall had few visitors.
The letter that I wrote to Lord Wraxall, it must have been...
After a polite exchange of letters, Mark Girouard was allowed in.
He was an eccentric, reclusive old bachelor by then, and he just lived in the house on his own. I mean, I think cleaning ladies came in, but there wasn't much signs of anybody else. And all over the place there were piles of books and papers, and he could never find anything because everything was in a pile somewhere.
Lord Wraxall died last year, leaving not one heir but 19. His home went on the market in the spring. In 50 days, the National Trust raised £1.5 million in donations towards the overall cost of buying the house and most of its contents.
It's come at a time when people were saying, oh, are the days of the country house over? Are people as interested these days? And I think the public response has just been overwhelming. Yes, people are interested. People will absolutely love to see it and be hungry for information about how a great estate like this worked, how we are going to restore and manage it.
Contrast Tintersfield's salvation with Mentmore's fate. It's the most famous among at least 12 prize Victorian mansions dismantled in the last 20 years. In fact, the National Trust hasn't saved a country house intact since 1991. The loss of Mentmore led to the creation of the National Heritage Memorial Fund. Tintersfield couldn't have been saved without a £17.5 million grant from them.
It is by far and away the biggest grant we have ever given. And I think my board thought it was the most difficult meeting and decision they'd ever had to take. On the other hand, it is exactly what the National Heritage Memorial Fund was set up to do.
People didn't always feel so emotional about Victorian Gothic architecture, although its greatest exponent, Augustus Pugin, saw it as a rediscovery of England's Christian roots. By the 1920s, it was considered a ghastly hybrid.
They took against Victorian architecture and they considered it ugly, clumsy. I mean, people just took it for granted that Victorian buildings were hideous. It was an accepted fact of life.
It's hoped Tintersfield will be restored with the help of people living nearby, and visitors can watch. Lord Wraxall might not have liked such newfangled ideas of social inclusion, but he surely wouldn't have minded seeing his home look the best the public's money can buy.
Maddie Holt. Tomorrow's newspaper front page is coming up shortly. Before that, though, a roundup of today's news. Our main story tonight, the Prime Minister has outlined his proposals for a reform of the criminal justice system, including an end to the double jeopardy rule. On this programme, the Home Office Minister, Lord Falconer, defended the government proposals and argued that juries had a right to know of a defendant's previous convictions. Following this morning's suicide bomb, the Israeli Security Cabinet has decided on a series of military actions, it says, in retaliation, but has given no more details. Tonight, 7 Israeli tanks have moved into the West Bank town of Jenin, according to Palestinian officials. Palestinian gunmen fired at the tanks, but there are no reports of casualties. There's been another surprising result in the World Cup. Italy, one of the tournament favourites, have been knocked out by the co-host South Korea. A golden goal in extra time saw them go into the next round. The result prompted huge celebrations across the country. More than 1 million people took to the streets of Seoul. Satpal Ram, the man convicted for a murder he's always claimed was self-defence, has told the BBC tonight that he's a free man. He's served more than 15 years for the murder of Clark Pierce at a restaurant in Birmingham. He's always protested his innocence, saying he was the victim of a race attack. And the markets, the FT100 share index closed down. In New York, the Dow Jones finished up slightly. Against the euro, the pound was up, and against the dollar, the pound was also up. And tomorrow morning's front page is the day's Telegraph leads with that news we reported earlier of Cherie Blair's one-sentence expression about Palestinian suicide bombers. That story also, as we mentioned, dominates the front page of the Daily Mail. The Independent: bus bomb leaves 20 dead as Israel asks what's next. The Guardian: bus bomb kills 19. The Financial Times has news in the middle of the page there about David Blunkett's retreat over the Snoopers charter. And the Sun goes with news that Brazil is apparently wobbling on the eve of their battle with England in the World Cup. That is all from Newsnight tonight. There is round-the-clock news coverage on BBC News 24. I'll be back with more tomorrow. Until then, though, from all of us on the programme, good night.